Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Pruchová-Hruzová, and on behalf of the Fresh Eye platform for the study of visual cultures based in Prague, Czech Republic, I would like to welcome you at the first program of 2022, and I would like to wish you, on behalf of our whole team, the best for this new year. For those who meet a Fresh Eye for the first time, just allow me to briefly introduce the set of our activities. As an independent cultural and educational platform, we organize public lectures, screenings, workshops, conferences, and we do operate within the Czech Republic as well as internationally. For example, last November, specifically at the end of the month, the Fresh Eye organized a 2-day series of workshops in collaboration with a leading world visual theorist, critic, and activist Nicholas Mrtsev. All our public activities have been recorded and made publicly available via the project website, along with an accompanying text library. And you can find all the materials on the website called www.fresh-i.cz or org. Tonight's program, called Image versus Invisible, is an outcome of a collaboration between the Fresh Eye and the Hraničář gallery, located in the north of Bohemia, specifically in Ústí nad Labem. And tonight's program was also kindly supported by the State Cultural Fund, so thank you for that. Its main goal is reflect upon the phenomenon and the issue of visibility in a larger social and political framework. And we are interested in the visibility as the social and political power which makes certain people, individuals, communities, topics, themes, locations, and objects invisible, and on contrary, others do stay as a dominant within what we see and what we perceive as visible in our social realm. So we want tonight to talk about the issue of the light, specifically about the visibility, and the light is the 1-year topic of the Hraničář gallery. So thank you, Hraničář gallery, for this collaboration and for inspiring us to transform the issue of the light to the social and political phenomenon of visibility. We are about to watch 3 short presentations, which will be delivered by 3 international guests, and we are very pleased to welcome here, firstly, Polish visual sociologist Ludmila Vladinak, then Croatian visual and film theorist Boris Ružić, and as the third one, Slovak urbanist Milota Sidorova. I would like to thank again all of them for their energy and great collaboration and communication. Also, I would like to thank you all in our audience that you've joined us, and I would like to ask you to contribute to our conversation during the Q&A session, which will follow after each presentation. So please don't hesitate to use YouTube chat and to share your opinions, questions, thoughts. We will be very grateful for that. So let's start with the first presentation. I would like to briefly introduce our first guest, who is Ludmila Vladinak. She's an assistant professor in sociology at the Faculty of Humanities, Charles University. She specializes in qualitative research and visual research methods. Her academic interests concentrate around cultural sociology, sociology of families, and borderlands and peripheries. So welcome, Ludmila. Thank you for being our guest.
Welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be able to discuss the topic of light in the place of Czech-German borderland. It's actually I haven't touched that subject for 2 years now, and then that distant, that physical and spatial and any kind of metaphorical distance made it very interesting to me, and with a new and a fresh eye, nomen, I was able to look at it after 2 years when you sent me the invitation to join tonight's discussion. And I said, oh, that's such a great idea and opportunity actually to revise what I've done in that huge dissertation research, and actually to be able to present it and discuss it. And that's so thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. So obviously the fresh eye is bringing some fresh eyes also to our guests. So I very much look forward to listening and when watching the presentation. So let's go for that.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. My name is Ludmila Vladinak. I'm a Polish sociologist based in Prague for a few years now. And my PhD doctoral research was based in two borderlands of Central Europe. One of them was the Czech-German borderland. And so this is somehow connected to the idea both of light and the Ústí nad Labem region. So today I would like to present you some main ideas from my study, from my research, and actually give you some background for further, recollection of thoughts, or any kind of reflection on how we visualize the Czech-German borderland here in Czechia, or how we work with that issue, and what's the role of light in it. So as you can see, the title slide brings an image, a photo by famous Czech photographer Jaroslav Kučera from his photo album, a collection of photographies from the Czech-German borderland called Sudety, as this is the name that is given to the region. This is not only a geographical name, this is a historical and cultural name. The notion of some culture element is there as well. And this is one of the most popular images that is being reproduced when we discuss this album, or that visual representation of the borderland that are depicted in there. And then I chose it on purpose and put it in here at the very beginning, just to play a little bit with those stereotypes or stereotypical representation or visual representations of the borderland that we may come across here in the public sphere of Czech, let's call it Czech culture, So I also entitled my presentation "Darkness is Powerlessness," because recently I was also thinking on how about the role of light and and also the role of darkness in visually representing some very strong social emotions, or emotions and social processes that are behind those representations. So can you see the slide number 2? Yeah, okay, great. So I posed myself at the very beginning while preparing this presentation 2 questions. What is the role of light in recollecting local memory and identity? And is it possible to express one's relation to time and place through casting light or shade? And I consider this Czech-German borderland, or I used to consider it very throughout the whole research. I worked in that region for 4 years, and mostly in the field. I consider this region as a field of constantly negotiating so-called shadow play. It means that there is there's so-called belonging making process. It's too far-fetched to say identity making process. That's why I use the word belonging. After some British anthropologist Nira Yuval Davis, I think this belonging is more important and more up to date and more resonates with what's going on in there than with that very strong word identity, that sociologically speaking, as I'm a sociologist, that would require a lot of effort to prove that there is a strong, identity making thing going on there. And all those processes that I will describe to you very briefly tonight are also about power and about having power and about being also powerless in certain social situations, certain social circumstances. So there is, I call it a tale of two discourses. As in my research, I observed that there exist like two visual discourses regarding the Czech-German borderland. The first is discourse center, I call it center on periphery. So there is a center. The Czech Republic is so small that it's mostly about, Prague or inland. And the center tells a story about the periphery for its own central perspective. And then and uses some tools to do so, like Czech noir stylization. I will discuss it in a minute. And some stereotypes, visual stereotypes regarding power, very often gender stereotypes. This is also what is that Kučera's image from the beginning of my presentation is also about stereotype of visual, depicting gender somehow, depicting some gender roles, telling the story of the borderland or visualizing that story through the, some kind of, gender powerlessness in here. And then the second discourse is called periphery on periphery. So this is when the periphery tells the story itself. So, and this is the bottom-up phenomena that is going on in there, and I actually track it in my research. And that is it brings visual objects to light. It's very much embedded in local memory, or it uses local memory to create some new story about the place. And through I call it invisible visual representation. This is, of course, kind of an oxymoron, but I will explain it later. Why it's that word invisible is crucial here, or why I put it in that call it sentence, a phrase, because it also touches some very important or like significant moment of very processes that are nowadays, or let's call it nowadays, or currently, maybe currently is a better word, taking place in there when it comes to local memory and this belonging making. So one of my research interests, it was like 3-4 years ago, there were various TV series or even one long full-length movie that took place in that Czech-German borderland. So the setting was in there, this exotic, ambiguous, not so popular at that time, or not so common at that time in Czech TV and film productions setting. And there were like plenty of them at some point, and most of them were like detective stories, like crime stories, and which is also a part of a bigger a noir crime trend all over the world in film and TV productions. But there was something specific about it here on the Czech ground, and so I studied few of them. I used similar, I mostly work with within the field of visual semiotics. So I was mostly interested in in the meaning behind the images, the meaning behind those various visual representations, and actually it turned out that they very much use that noir effect in order to create from those borderland places something a little bit different, that it is when you come in there and look at with your own eyes, not through the lenses of those productions, and that and they very often play with light in a sense that they make it darker, like everything is gray and gloomy. It's called in English literary critic, it's called pathetic fallacy, when you try to evoke some emotions through creating certain colors or atmosphere in the in the landscape, in the bigger picture, and actually they play with it very much, those productions, in the sense that you can hardly see the sun shining in there, and then it's always a November-like weather, and I was asking myself, why to do so? Why to use so much darkness and grayishness and all those shadows and very, very dark colors to make that stylization of Nordic noir stories, whereas in Scandinavia this is more or less expected, because this is the Scandinavian weather, and here in the Czech Republic these are mostly mountains or mountain areas, but still the weather is not so bad in there, or that there is sometimes the sky is even blue. And then actually I came out my conclusion was that this is like how to deal with that overwhelming feeling of powerlessness, so that the region, for those of our viewers who are not from the Czech Republic, is a very problematic one in terms of it. The past, the 20th century past, is kind of complicated because of the post-war expulsion of the German ethnic inhabitants of the region, and so then some influx of migrants from various parts of the Central Europe. There are also some, economic problems and turbulences as an aftermath of 1989 changes in the region. The whole Central Europe, and huge unemployment, poverty, and other social issues that contemporary Czech society faces. And I did, in my interpretation of that noir, why to use that noir effects, why to put all those crime stories on the borderland and make it almost a kind of a pastiche of on the landscape, why to abuse visually to some extent this landscape, is just how to deal with that hopelessness that we can do. That there's a stigma of a periphery, of course. There's a lot of troubles in there, and visually, it's not. Of course, the nature is beautiful, but then let's call it like human objects are less. Less beautiful. There's a devastation of the region. Some abandoned places, cities, old factories. Post-industrial areas, brownfields, and so on and so forth. And then, so my thought in here was that it is a kind of a way through that light operation how to actually express all those very hard and difficult emotions regarding the region. This is why to use that noir effect in there while visualizing the borderland. And the other aspect of that visualization is also the darkness and versus powerlessness. So in most of those productions, there's one of the protagonists is a female sex worker, or there are female sex workers in there, very often, presented as you can see on the screen, and actually it's still an open question for me. Why work so much with those gender stereotypes? So why to use those gender stereotypes so much in portraying the borderland? I haven't found still a very convincing scientific argument. I'm just still somehow working on it. There is a thing, but still, what does it mean? What's the meaning behind it? To focus that visual part of of it on both on gender stereotypes and what's the role of light in it. Like it's always presented in darkness, as you can see. All those images you've just seen in my presentation, they come from the official press and promotional materials issued by the producers of those productions. So my idea was that those frames, visual frames and images, the owners of, or the artists, creators of those pieces would like us, to consider as the most, important. Those are the most important visual frames or visual representation. That's why I also put them in my study, because those are like official representations of those productions, official visual representations of those productions. So it also means that those are, those images through which those people or the whole, groups of people behind those productions actually perceive that region that is very far more, complex, vivid, and colorful, but you cannot find those elements in Czech noir about Czech noir crime stories about the Czech German, or set in the Czech-German borderland. Okay, so this is just briefly to show you that how I worked with it. Like I had part of a bigger paper and work, but this is how I put those productions all together and try and analyze them through the same elements, and then draw bigger conclusions from it. Okay, and that was that discourse that comes from center to periphery, and that represent that noir, dark, grayish representation of the borderland. And when the light is crucial in actually depicting some emotions like powerlessness, for instance, or like idea or some powerlessness towards social problems, economic problems, there, powerlessness over complex history that is there, and all other aspects that and also the fact that it's still no man's land, in a sense that it's very difficult to say to whom that borderland landscape belongs to, in a sense that it does not. It's very difficult to say that it belongs to the inhabitants of the region. Or if we ask them, as I did, they never say, "Okay, we are here. We have that strong feeling that we are from that place." It's mostly about, "Yeah, I think so. Maybe I'm from my village. Maybe I'm from my town, but I don't know if I'm from the region." And also people from the center of Czech inlands also have some complex relations to that place, and that powerlessness is in there as well. And the second discourse that is created bottom up, sociologically speaking, so not through some official discourses of Czech TV productions, for instance, but by some ordinary inhabitants and people interested in the visual representations of their home place. And this I studied that even more in depth than that film and TV series, because I was like mostly interested why people put so much of that visual content online. So it means like analog goes digital. So they find some so-called forgotten photographs or postcards or whatever depicting their towns or villages, and they say, okay, and I would share it on some Facebook, amateur Facebook sharing platform, to just for others to see that it used to be, mostly within the frame, it used to be better in here. So we had such a beautiful castle, we had such a great a street like this Dlouhá street from Teplice. You can see next to me that this is the street was completely demolished by the communist municipality of Teplice in 1950s, I suppose, or 1960s even. So it's no longer there. So this is like when you take something that is invisible, that used to be there in that landscape, and you make it again visible, and but through sharing, digitalizing it, and then sharing, make it official, make it visible, and discussing it with other people, creating some background for the communication. Okay, so we used to have such a nice or such an interesting street in here. It's a pity it's no longer here, but it's a great first step to create some more embedded social interactions in the place. Like, let's talk about something. And if we have nothing in common because we come from different regions, because our past is traumatized, then it's difficult to find some, common ground to create a new story. And those newly visible and previously invisible elements of the landscape, it's both about city landscape and then some mountain landscape. Everything in here is just landscape, and that it gives also them that feeling of owning in time and place. This is what Susan Sontag says. She says, like, the function of photography is to give people a feeling of owning time and space, and that function is in that process here in the Czech borderland as well. It's like we own a little bit the place that was never ours because we were forced to live in there, or we came in there and we are the second generation, or we are maybe the third generation, but we are not from the region, so to speak. But through that new chapter of making some landscape elements visible, we have that feeling that we actually own that landscape a little bit. We own that place a little bit, and this gives us a new potential, ground for other social processes to emerge on. So I can, at the end, I think I'm running out of time. I cannot control it. Yeah, I can see a comment that I have to be really quick. So just to show you two examples of those invisible parts of a landscape that I actually found through my research, that people made visible to themselves, the people from the region. Part of my research took place in the town of Teplice, and as you can see in there, it's I've discussed those images with people through photo elicitation interviews, and this is one of those images people people decided to discuss very frequently with me and say, okay, and this is it. This is how we would like to be seen, not through that noir frame, not through that stigmatization of peripheral borderland abandoned area, but through the fact that we were first in the Velvet Revolution, that the revolution started in Teplice before it started in Prague in November of 1989. And the second one is about a synagogue that was actually during the Crystal Night. The synagogue was burned by the Nazis, and so it's no longer there. It was huge, as you can see. It was a kind of a dominant element in the landscape. And this is how to make something that is invisible, that is no longer there, visible, through sharing and owning an old image, an old postcard of the synagogue. That was kind of, and through discussing it, and through making it again element of our, as I call it in my research, rituals, communicative memory. So we talk about it. There is a ritual about talking about the past, but thinking about the future, talking about the past. And then we use that memory. It's a communicative tool. We have something common. We have something we can share. And my conclusion, one of the biggest ones from that research is, or that study, is that without those visual elements of memory, without those visual representation of memory, all that process of creating new memory, new all that belonging making process wouldn't be simply possible. That those visual elements, those visual representations, those visible visual elements are crucial for the whole belonging making process in the Czech-German borderlands. So that would be it in a very nutshell. But thank you very much. I'm looking forward for some questions, and that would be it.
Thank you so much, Ludmila. This was really interesting to me, as my research interest is very close to that visual collective memory. And I would also like to encourage everyone who joined us tonight for the Watching the Fresh Eyes program to share the comments, thoughts, or opinions via the YouTube chat. And I will use my privilege to be the first one who can ask a question. I would like to ask you, actually, where do you see opportunities to empower this bottom-up perspective, this kind of visual discourse which is created by the periphery, and when the periphery comments on periphery, how to empower it if this central visual discourse, which is centralized on periphery, is actually dominating through the mainstream media landscape, through the film and TV series. For example, I'm suggesting the opportunity of using the social media, or using some specific like local archives, online archives, or virtual exhibition. Like, I'm thinking more about the digital realm as a kind of source and a platform for circulating these visuals, which then empower this bottom-up approach. So where do you see, like, which platforms are here as an opportunity for empowering this bottom-up perspective?
Yeah, definitely Facebook. Facebook was the first one, first and the foremost. Facebook was the first one, and it's a very accessible. It's a low level of entry. You do not and this is what makes it even more interesting. That empowerness comes also from the fact that it is a very democratic process. So there are people, young people, who are of course very fond of using digital media and being able to digitalize everything. But it's also possible for some elderly people to digitalize their photo albums and upload it in there. It's quite easy, and it's intuitive. I mean, the user experience in there. So it's still mostly Facebook. It was Instagram as well, or this Instagram, but because Instagram is limited to some age cohorts, it's not so much accessible to other groups. And I think that Facebook, with all those critical comments on it these days, played a significant, enormous role in it, as it allowed people to gather, to communicate, to share. And without those social media platforms, the whole process wouldn't be possible. But then the next step is that they go offline. I know it's maybe old-fashioned to say it offline these days, because we shouldn't make those differentiations between online and offline, and not anymore. But in a sense that they okay, so we had such a great collection of postcards on that some kind of an account we created. So let's print them and let's put them in some. And it happens that they create some bottom-up exhibition in some library, local library, or in some main square. And of course you can it's interesting in terms of quality, and then how they, and sometimes they making up the stories around it, so there's no fact check about some historical buildings, monuments, people, whatever. But this is what's so vivid and great about it, that you can see that memory in making, all that local narrative in making, and it's so strong. And and being involved in it, it's empowering itself already. So, and then this is okay. So we have our own story. We don't need to look at our place through the lenses of Czech TV production about some next Polish guy coming and trying to solve some crime story, and then we can see only us through those cliche representations of of our region. We would like to be seen differently. We would like to be seen in color mostly. So not to be seen in black and white like this Kuchera's album, or his images are very stereotypical, and I say, okay, it's so black and white, and it's, of course, it's aesthetically speaking, we can like it, or say, yeah, it's something in there, or it's stronger, it's more powerful. And black and white images these days are definitely like more powerful with a high contrast and so on. But then there's the people come and say, okay, but we would like to be seen in color.
I can see. Yeah, thank you for the answer. I did definitely kind of resonate with it. And my second question kind of touches upon what you mentioned, which is that the Facebook can be used by the different age groups. So there is a kind of like a low-key digital literacy that is needed in a way. So when you were interviewing your respondents as a part of your research process, did you feel that there is a different kind of relationship, different type and kind of collective memory, the way how we approach it if we are from the younger and the older generations? Can you see that the complexity is a different one, that the way of belonging is different for different age groups?
Yeah, definitely. There are like two aspects in that question. The first is that, of course, I had some interviewees that were over 80 years old, because I wanted to talk to people who came to the region with their parents, so were not even born in there. And then those people never used any single photo in those interviews. So they had their own stories. They had their own images in their heads. They were not so much accustomed to work with visual materials. So I put all those images in front of them, and they didn't care. They were talking their own source, or they had their own images in their own photo albums. And that was the biggest, generational change I observed in my research. Those young people that are that the younger you are, the more visually socialized you are. Let's call it like that. And then that's what I observed. And the other thing is the distinction between memory makers and memory users. So some of those people were involved more, or on an advanced level, let's get like that, because they were also those who chase for those photographies, or upload them and share them. And those are memory makers. Those are people who are more active in their role, not only to consume those representations, but also to be involved in creating that discourse, like very much. So I distinguish between like two roles in that between those people in that community of memory.
Thank you for this clarification. Definitely there would be one Fresh Eye evening dedicated only to this rich research and to this topic. But I greatly appreciate the way how you've implemented the issue of the light, how you used it as a metaphor, as well as in a way a research tool at this moment, or research concept to present this rich study. And thank you again for being our guest for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And now I will use my privilege and pleasure to welcome here the second guest of tonight's program, who is Boris Ružič. So allow me to briefly introduce Boris. Boris is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Cultural Studies, University of Rijeka, Croatia. He teaches at this moment 4 courses engaged with film studies and visual culture. His interests lie at the intersection of politics of emancipation, moving images, as well as amateur moving images, migrations, and digital technologies. He has published several scientific articles in books and international journals. He has also co-authored a book regarding the film and media analysis, and currently At his university, he coordinates 3 international projects in the domains of humanities, film, visual culture, and memory studies, which are highly interesting topics and disciplines to us. And I'm very glad that Boris is here tonight with us. And I would also like to mention that he was one of the chosen participants for the WAVE workshops on online visual activism, which took place online last November with Nick Mirzev. So this is a great that we continue in this collaboration. So welcome, Boris. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, especially for the organizers for organizing this event. I'm sincerely grateful to be here, and especially thanks to you, Andrea, for inviting me to share my thoughts with all of you today. And thank you for the lovely introduction of me also. So I will not go into the specifics of my own research outside of this talk today. So because of the time, I'll try to just give a small structural description of the small part of the research I wanted to present with all of you today here. It's based on self-representational practices, as I say, of refugees and or migrants on their travels through the Balkan region from 2015 to today. And what does that mean? It's kind of a big word, big syntagm. When I talk about self-representational practices, I refer to the analysis of migrant imagery of their own travels, with special focus on the mistreatment and pushbacks over the borders caught on their smartphones. In short, I just like to analyze for today not only the silent or the stolen voices, as some theoreticians posted, but as well to see the possibilities and possible ways of reclaiming not only the right to look, as Nick Mirzev would say, but also the right to be seen and acted upon. Also, it's interesting for me that in your language, as I saw in your small announcement of the event today, you use obraz for the word image. In Croatian, obraz means face or a cheek in various circumstances. So I see this also as a symptomatic for today's talk. It could be shortened to this, if there's a way, is there a way to reclaim both the face of the migrant and its image in both meanings of both languages? So in short, I just like, as a short also structural introduction, I see the migrant as a central political figure today and of the time to come. And when thinking about the migrant, I take it as a category not defined solely, by the single act of moving from one place to the other in a geographic sense, but as a long-term process that constitutes cultural and political landscapes of various societies, from the outset of cultures and civilizations. Also, according to Thomas Nile, for example, a theoretician that theorized about the figure of the migrant, he states that expansion on the one side and expulsion on the other are linked. Economic growth, for example, within the capitalist paradigm, most often means impoverishment on the one part of the population at the expense of the other, or at least accumulation of material resources non-existent as someone else's property in nature. That means, in a way, that the figure of the migrant is crucial also for me in a necropolitical, biopolitical, and legislative sense today. And I would like to talk a bit about those three forms. When I say necropolitical sense, I'm following to those who know Achille Mbembe's notion of necropolitics, who explains it as the management and regulation of life from the perspective of the production and regulation of death. And I mean this, for example, IOM, the International Organization for Migration, estimated that 40,000 people died attempting to cross the border between 2005 and 2015. More specifically, for example, from 2014 until September of last year, known migrant and or refugee deaths in the Mediterranean, just known, was 22,619, on average 8 deaths per day. When I say biopolitical sense, I mean the increased securitization on the borders of Europe, building concrete walls, buying surveillance drones, using military technologies, of surveying the border crossings by Frontex, funding non-EU countries such as Turkey and Libya in order to control the refugee influx, etc. And when I mean the legislative sense, the third sense, I mean the increasing pressure from the one side, from the EU, to further establish its hard outside borders by the means, for example, of Dublin regulation, Dublin Accord, one of the examples. Those three instances converge on one special interest of mine, and that is the emergence of pushbacks. And in these presentations, I'd just like to provide an insight into the illegal pushbacks caught on cameras and shared either among migrants themselves in private Facebook groups, or used as an evidence for mistreatment, emphasizing the importance of images not made of them, but images made by them. When I say them, I mean the migrants or the refugees. So also a bit of a context. My interest is mostly in the migratory flows in Southeastern Europe from 2015 until today. And that interest is particularly shaped by the emergence of the so-called Balkan Corridor, as you can see it here on the map. It was the semi-official, semi-legal migration route for refugees traveling from Turkey and Greece, consisting of different points, as you can see, in Macedonia, Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia towards Hungary and Western Europe. And to understand just the scope of migration at that time, it is important to know that just in 2015, more than 1 million of arrivals to Europe were carried out, mostly through Greece. So although it is now officially closed, or unofficially closed, because it was not ever officially opened, it is still used today by many migrants who try to enter Europe. And of course, I can see somebody's question right now, if your research is about the representation of migrants, why just don't use the news media reporting on migrations and see what's going on? Well, others did that, and I just like to share two studies and see why I think there's something lacking in those studies, not the studies per se. So, for example, this study, and I know it's a big slide, but somebody hope will make sense of some of the numbers here. This study is analyzing the ways in which mainstream newspapers reported on the 2015 migrant wave in print and online in 8 European countries. The study concluded that 67% of media outlets never directly quoted migrant, although they clearly spoke about them. Only 5% news on migration put an emphasis on displacement, while 74% fell under politics and crime. Only 21% of news items on asylum and migration reference a refugee or migrant. Over 3/4 of the stories do not identify an individual refugee or migrant, nor include their voice or experience. The second study, for example, this time qualitative, conducted 68 interviews with senior journalists and media professionals in 6 European countries, studying the impact of various factors on migration-related news. They concluded that migrants are mostly media absent because the reporting on them is either carried out routinely, just like in the first study, or is disregarded, as it takes too much effort to figure out the sources and to cover the complex problem individually because migrants move or are anonymous. So even though the problem of migration seems omnipresent, it seems like it's everywhere, from 2015 at least, these numbers indicate also a pattern of invisibility for the subjects of migration, the migrants themselves, obviously. And before I go into the case studies themselves, just one terminological classification also that I'd like to clear, and that is the pushback. What is the pushback? And the formal definition is there is a set of measures by which refugees and migrants are forced back over a border, generally immediately after they have crossed it, without consideration of their individual circumstances and without any possibility to apply for asylum or to apply for asylum, or to put forward arguments against the measures taken. Pushbacks violate, among other laws, the European Convention of Human Rights. They're usually carried in bordering regions, as you can see here, by state authorities or their proxies. From Greece, for example, and Croatia. The red dots are the dots that are mostly that are pushback zones. So the zones in which police take migrants from Croatia back to Bosnia and Herzegovina in this example, or from Slovenia back to Croatia. So in short, the practice of pushbacks is unlawful because it deprives the people of the right to challenge the decision to return them. Through this analysis, I'd like to distill or suggest, at least 3 types of visual representations of migrants today. The one is what I call a bit overly ambitious, but I'll go with it, the dominant scopic regime or the capital image. The other is the image as evidence, the image by migrants mostly. And the third one is the capillary image, as I name it, or the personal archival image, the memory image, or communicative image on the migrant's smartphone. So just for a small context on what do I see as the first, the capital, the big, the dominant image, the images like these, the images we are mostly, we mostly see. Those images either use generalized or iconoclast, even imagery of migrants, catering, to what Foucault famously described as seeing without being seen. Those are the most often ways of portrayal, as I've shown by presenting a couple of quantitative research on the media and news reporting. The visual records of migrants in mainstream outlets include, as you can see, masses of people on boats or in force, and they're either depicted as an invading force, appearing from a distance, or sometimes even individually. But that portrayal is usually geared towards either their victimization or their death, following the Christian tradition of iconography. We all know those images, the violent or victim images of migrants. I choose not to show those today for obvious reasons. The second type of the image, the possible legislative image, is also mediated, but via various NGOs, civil society organizations, activists, or independent journalists who go through various lengths to document and disseminate today's situation at the borders of Europe. Even though these kinds of images can be similar to ethnographic photography or have the features, for example, of exoticizing their subjects, those images can help with the spreading of news regarding migration today. They can include their own voices, the migrant voices, and migrant testimonies. But also they can be used as an evidence in court. So, for example, these images are part of an investigation by the German paper Der Spiegel in the June of 2020 that revealed that the Greek Coast Guard intercepted boats carrying migrants in international or even national waters, firing warning shots and towing the boats back to Turkey illegally, in the process violating also international maritime law. They concluded that more than a dozen by analyzing more than a dozen videos, that masked men, almost certainly Greek border police, regularly attack refugee boats in the area and tow them back to Turkey. So in the images from the article, we can see those boats. So we can see the images from the migrant phones, and we can see the Greek Coast Guard towing the boats back to Turkey. For example, these images, as I said, can be used as a counter-visual evidence or even the legal evidence of mistreatment of migrants. For example, in June of 2020, Slovenian High Court reached a verdict claiming that the police illegally deported one migrant from Slovenia to Croatia and then Bosnia near Velika Kladuša, the migrant camp. The same happened in Italy a couple of months ago when the court decided it was illegal to push back one Pakistani citizen to Slovenia and then back to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So in short, these representations, I'd like to pose it, include images from the migrants themselves to escalate the problem to the authorities, either by suing the unlawful treatment or by appealing to the higher international bodies. There is also a growing evidence of these acts that this talk cannot presume to summarize. For example, for those interested, Border Violence Monitoring Network, one of the organizations, recently published a 2-volume book on evidence on police pushbacks in Europe, consisting of almost 2,000 pages, individual reports, interviews with the migrants, witnesses of their sometimes torture or pushbacks or expulsions. Danish Refugee Council also, for example, reported on pushbacks of 16,520 persons from Croatia to Bosnia and Herzegovina, out of which 8,400 people reported physical abuse. So those images are also indicative of the power of the personal or the smartphone image to be used, and which is not used today by media, but by various organizations to try to escalate the problem of the migrant mistreatment. But the last form, which I deem the capillary image, or Hito Steyer calls it the poor image, the debris of audiovisual production, the trash that washes up on the digital economies, as she says, That's also the most rare image, because that is the one of the self-representational image of the migrants without the mediation, usually present on digital platforms such as in various private Facebook groups through which they connect and share their personal experience and images. These groups also represent heterogeneous spaces of connections. Some are private groups, others are general pages we can all click on. Some get shut down either by Facebook or by their own volition. And at any given time, there are more than as much as I know, more than a dozen specialized pages for migrant travels through the Balkans on Facebook. My analysis will just center on 2 Facebook groups that feature images from the routes of migrant travels to Croatia. Those may not produce legal effects or international visibility, but can produce certain effective responses. Precisely, I claim, by the inclusion of subjective accounts by migrants through visual and narrative representation. For example, this image was created on Facebook on one private group for the so-called haragas. Not to go deep into it, haraga is a term that originates from Arabic, Moroccan dialect, meaning those who burn, denoting people without papers, who burn their papers before entering Europe. I gained access to private groups meant for sharing best routes of passages through borders, dangers on the road, or were used for communication with families. These images are usually selfies that are made in the camps or bordering regions between Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And mostly these groups underline for me and my research the importance of digital media and representing those who have no other means of making themselves visible, or no space to make themselves visible. The images also are not intended for larger audiences, hence also the anonymity of the faces, but they're for migrants themselves on a personal level as an archive of travels, maybe also even a preservation of memory, but also on a collective level as a message of hope and motivation for others deciding to travel. And as I already stated, most of the images made by migrants passing through Croatia show secluded forest areas in bodies positioned mostly near the ground, as we can see here, to avoid border surveillance or police control. Such photographs are already framed by extra visual circumstances, body positions, bags with food, winter clothing, even during warmer season, etc. From the description of the images as well as the comments, we can underline 2 main aspects of photos in constructing a larger idea of the migrant image. One is the need to traverse the land safely towards the better life in the West, and the other is to communicate to others that they are well and motivated to continue, which is sometimes even often a lie, because they're trying to stay motivated and trying to communicate their happiness, but they are usually obviously suffering and are in dire conditions in their traversing the lands. So sometimes also the 2 aspects overlap, but mostly they are distinct. Some images state the tiredness of being expelled from the land and the hopelessness in trying again, but also they can indicate disappointment by the Croatian police, for example, or the fear of weather conditions. Very rarely, images include recognizable features, such as villages or cars, from apparent reasons, and almost none include local people outside of images made in migrant camps. So these images for me also are interesting because they display the other important aspect of self-representational visuality. There is no singular representation of the migrant, no icon that can show their cohesion. There's no migrant per se. The images are often dissonant, showing people that don't necessarily know each other's language. The absence of totalization for me is also productive. They sometimes lack solidarity, as groups are divided among class, religion, and gender lines. So the forest camp, for example, or a forest itself is a microcosm of the same diverse society that we can relate to and we can understand. So one of the questions obviously is what to do with those images. We have, as I've already stated, images that use the underrepresentation in a legal way, but sometimes also as an evidence. But they can also produce, I claim, not only the legal, so to speak, usefulness, but also the effective response. And some of the psychological research I'd like to mention here, because I don't have much time, is by Slovik. He states that the reasons for the lack of empathy in his research in viewers' responses say because it's as the images become more generalized, the capacity for empathy diminishes. And building on that, I'd like to posit that the appearance of migrants as generalized masses obviously leads to the perpetuation of populist discourses of fear and the threat of the unknown, as witnessed by many cultural studies scholars and ethnographers in recent years. So even though these images are hardly understandable per se, as they are fragmented, poor resolution, lack context, they require an engagement from the viewer. And unlike generalized or victimized images of migrants, the ones I'm showing today may produce in a way, effective attunement with the possibility to act upon them. So in a way, by allowing, as I stated here, migrant visual stories to be seen in the Western discourse means to use in part a systemic, hegemonic scopic order of visualization and reappropriate it by turning the look backwards. By using, so to speak, technologies of surveillance, migrants and refugees are making themselves seen and are providing a look into what is usually out of sight in this type, police violence. It is also reminiscent of an old trick, from Hamlet, from Mousetrap, in which Hamlet obtains knowledge of the guy who killed his father, not by directly confronting the gaze of Claudius, if you remember, but by watching his reaction, the reflection of the mirror, so to speak. So by circumventing the direct hierarchy of the look, he suggests a counter look. So I argue in a bit of a conclusion that the stories made by migrants can be political and pedagogical, significant, because of a close-up and identification can have a concrete psychological, effective, and legal effects and understanding in viewers, unlike images made of groups from a distance. So outside of the power of the representation in demanding legal safety from violence, there is also the possibility to affect viewer in using those subjective, fragmented, poor images. It is also, as Ariela Azoulay claims in one of her books, a process of photography through affective bond, taking on a civic duty to respond. And civic duty for her is an explicit invitation on the part of migrants themselves for publics to take a stance towards their arrival. And this is because, in a way, their action is no longer procedural or self-referential, but for the first time, it now performs what Azoulay claims is an active address. It is a purposeful self-assertion aiming to yield a political response. In so being, I see the activist encounters and the self-representational practices of migrants to challenge the routine reduction of migrants to either victimhood or threat on the borders. So for now, this is it. Obviously, I'm more than open to comments or questions. Thank you for everybody listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Boris, for the presentation. The same with Ludmila. This is topic so close to me, as I've done lately my research on the Central European mainstream media representation of migrants, and I do believe in the importance of this research, which comes from the other perspective and which shows actually this bottom-up perspective, which is something which nicely links your presentation with what Ludmila was talking about. I would also like our members of the audience tonight, because the chat has already started to be alive, and thanks to Filip Huněk and Michal Klodner for asking and Ludmila for replying. And at this moment, I have one question, and also one is coming from Ludmila. So we've agreed that I will reproduce her question. So this comes from our guest speaker, Ludmila Vladinak. I did some study part of a bigger research on visual representations of migrants and refugees in Polish mainstream TV reporting. And the visuals from the fall of 2015 depicted mostly women and children, families, etc. In 2018, there was coverage showing only young men in bigger groups coming to Europe. Have you observed a similar shift in visualizing migrants as well?
Yes, that's a super interesting question. And yes, I have, is the short answer. The longer one is not going to be long, but actually I'd just like to reference a bit of a switch that's also available in scholarly literature in the last year. So one of the questions that is usually posed in terms of migration in the last 6 or 7 years, from the so-called migrant crisis in 2014, is the difference between, at first, the readiness of countries to accept migrants and the refugees at that time, especially from the UK, from Germany, and the switch from the first 12 or 18 months of the discourse of acceptance and the understanding of the migrant troubles towards the closing of the borders. It is, as Ludmila is saying, it's traceable in visual representations, because it was at first, the victims of wars, which, the victimization of women and children were a good example of those kinds of narratives that media was also trying to establish. But also when the idea from the acceptance towards the closure switched, obviously the armies started to be depicted, the armies of migrants, the male migrants coming to Europe and, preparing the battlefield, for the future invasion, in a way. And those visual strategies are not random. And they're also psychologically researched. And in the first year, the acceptance of migrants, especially in the UK, was based on their temporality. The idea of, it's something that's happening right now because of, war in Syria, for example, but it's going to stop eventually when people realized it's not ending. Migration is going to be more and more of a problem in terms of climate crisis also in the coming years. The discourse from the acceptance toward the closure became more apparent. But also, the visual met with the political discourse on a really interesting level. So that's a good observation, I would say. Yeah, I didn't actually research it, but that's a good observation, I think.
Thank you both, to Boris as well as Ludka for the question and the answer. And my accompanying question would be about your observation about some of the gender stereotypes in terms of how women, women migrants, they do represent female migrants. They do represent themselves in terms of the roles of, for example, caretakers, mothers, community caretakers, not only like the mothers in terms of the family, but larger, like the emphasizing some caring and nurturing in terms of communities and a kinship. And then we can think about the self-representation of male migrants. Are there differences? And also I'm thinking about children and different age groups of children, because, for example, teenage migrants, do they represent themselves? Do they actually have a voice, visual voice as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also an interesting observation and a question. You, in a way, hinted at also at the part of the answer in terms of various means of representation. In my research, because I mostly deal with the recent migration, is mostly male dominant migration. And the answer is obvious in a way. It's because it's so hard to travel for so long, physically hard to travel for so long. And people usually go there, males first, to see either to visit their families or the ones that actually made it to whichever country they're trying to travel to, or to see, the routes or the possibilities, and then send money back to their families, to their homeland. So, the idea of the male army is the idea of actually being completely not completely knowing the hardships of traveling a couple of years from Iran, Pakistan, Syria, to Croatia, Czech Republic, or Germany. So mostly the representations I'm dealing with are men, are teenagers, or older men, and it's interesting because it's also a small cosmos of roles between those groups. And as I said in my research or just a short talk now, it's also so interesting because there's not a single migrant. Those people are from different countries. Sometimes they don't speak their language, the other language. The dialects are sometimes so different. Even sometimes they can argue between themselves. One will say, there's a problem in the Muslim, for example, world because why doesn't Dubai accept us? They're rich. Why do we need to go to Germany? So there's not like a singular idea of a migrant that wants to go to Germany because it's his like the promised country. And for me, this is because I don't have such various representation in terms of gender. Now in winter, most obviously, there are almost no women or children. The representation is mostly regarding male migrants, and there are unfortunately families that usually end up in media because they didn't survive the travels. So mostly families or children are media represented when they, especially during winters, die on their travels.
Yeah, I would definitely agree also from the observation that we nowadays can get from the Polish and Belarus borders, as we can nowadays see. It's still developing the process, and we can see these repetitive patterns being displayed in terms of mass media representations. And obviously, we need to learn more about those self-representations, which can definitely serve as evidences, as is one type which you've talked about, and which can definitely contribute into the legal discussion about what is happening, which seems to be very illegal actions on the both sides of the conflict. So at this moment, if there is no other question, it seems that not, but definitely go ahead because Boris will be still present, and the same with Ludka. She also answered after her talk and a Q&A session, so definitely use the YouTube chat and we can still answer your questions after this session. So thank you so much, Boris, for being our guest. I find your research very inspiring and important. So definitely let's keep in touch, not only through Fresh Eye. I will look forward to that.
Cheers,
so at this moment, I will have a pleasure to introduce our third guest speaker of tonight's program, and it's my dear colleague and friend, Slovak urbanist and feminist, Milota Sidorová. Milota Sidorová is an urbanist, feminist, and specialist in participative urban planning strategies. She's an independent practitioner improving non-governmental, private, and public projects in Central as well as Eastern Europe. She is a co-founder of a non-for-profit organization, Women of Public Space, Prague, and she's the author of many publications on sensitive urban planning, and she's currently collaborating with the Metropolitan Institute in Bratislava, Slovakia, among many other platforms. So Milota, welcome. Thank you so much for being our guest for tonight. And as we learned, actually, I learned from you today that you were our guest 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm happy that we can welcome you here again, and we can learn more from your inspiring practice and also about your recent projects, which are mostly developed in Bratislava. So thank you for having us, for having here tonight.
Andrea, thank you for invitation. And congratulations on, I would say, restless dramaturgy, because you keep doing this Fresh Eye every month, I guess, for so many years. It's exhausting. So it's great that you always find a new angle to look upon. Hi, everyone. I will soon share my presentation, but before I was listening to Boris, and actually this migrant discussion brought me to this. I don't know. Can you see this? This is like article I'm sharing. This is not a presentation. I suppose you can, right? At least give me some sign that you can. Yes, I think you can. So what you can see in here is a young Roma student from Poprad, who is studying currently in Bratislava, and he's raising the funds, like 5,000 euro for his two friends who are married couple from Afghanistan. And they are now facing death, and half of their family was already killed by Taliban. And when because they got together in the past, they asked him, "Can you help us?" And he said, "Why not?" So now he's working to get their visa, because they were both accepted to Slovak school, and he's working on actually the action to give them visas through Tehran and then to get them accepted in Slovakia. And as you can see, the article says, yes, they will face racism, but Taliban is much worse. And why I'm showing this, because this kept me going 2 days ago, and the article was basically about him making him trustworthy, because we all know what is the position of Roma people in Slovakia, not to mention Roma person that would help to raise funds for two people from Afghanistan to get to Slovakia. And he wasn't successful with the let's say this donation part, like crowdfunding, until the article came out. And after that, within a few hours, he got 6,000 euro, which was more than he hoped for. And I gave him this, and now we are chatting that, please, if you succeed and get them in Slovakia, make a welcome party, because we want to meet them. It's around 300 people who donated some money. So this is for Boris. We are seeing a couple. You can also click on their videos so you know who they are. And this young student who is now studying the university from Poprad, like Roma, and then there are the mountains, symbol of Slovakia, which are not in black and white, Ludmila, even if they're mountain region on the border. It's completely different, and I just love that image. I think we need more of these images and stories. Of course, we are not able to raise funds for everyone, but it just moved me, So basically, this is the light, and now I hope you can see. You can see my presentation. I don't know how you can tell me if you can see it, because now I'm sharing the screen. It will be something different. Okay. It is basically about my work as urban planner, and now it will be very practical, because what I'm doing for the past few years is basically to find people who don't have voice, and they have to be implemented into planning processes of the city of Bratislava. And for me, the light, what is this light? The topic of this lecture is light. Light means education or understanding, you understand. And then light also, as Ludmila said, is power. And power, when you're talking about planning something and government, means to have voice, to be able to influence something. This is practical, let's say, motive of my work, and you can translate it into something. So basically what my department of urban studies and public participation does we design participatory processes on different topics, whether it's strategic plan or it's like rental housing, which everybody hates. Everybody meaning people who already have residences, or revitalization of public spaces, or markets. Basically, we cover a variety of topics, and I would say people tend to be pretty selfish while defending their rights. They don't like new people come in, and when it comes to participation, it's mostly that politicians love those normative, educated taxpayers, white, already 6th generation living in Bratislava, with car and already permanent residency, so they can actually vote. So these are people for them. Everybody else, it's a little bit problem. Anyways, just at the beginning, what the office is doing at this young institute is we have to create a system about inclusive planning and participation, which is the first thing, because nobody knew what was it before. Of course, we want to publish this, create network of partners, and because participation means cooperation, that you have to cooperate. You cannot be only architect or politician or transportation engineer. It's, I think, the way how to work interdisciplinary, which is also something that Andra is doing all the time. Okay, participation can be pretty formal if you design it like that and you don't have any values. So me as a feminist for already a few years, I say, I want this gender mainstreaming to be part of a norm in planning in Slovakia, which is the country which really doesn't know that much about foreigners and doesn't have much like education about feminism. We will make it normal. That's why I'm part of administration at this moment. So we took a lot of knowledge from Vienna, which is a great city. And we also are bringing awareness also in these processes about climate change. We use a lot of data because this is really important. We try to evaluate our work as well. And why are we doing this? Basically about creating trust, because the trust is totally missing these days. Maybe some cases of our outcomes when you design participatory process, you survey people, you get their opinions, and you create like something like final reports, which basically say what public needs. But the other part, because we also do urban studies, we observe like public spaces, we observe the city, we observe people, and we interpret this. So it's more like socio-anthropological and very digital research applied. So then the voices of the public can be contextualized. As I'm saying, if you only ask some people, you will be totally wrong because you always get a fragment. And if you don't understand the place and even time, you will be wrong, you know. So this is cover of the book which came out recently. I will promote it a little bit because this is 2 years of our work. And we basically designed it with everyone in Slovakia. There are not so many people. There are in this room like who were dealing with participation or social inclusion. And we asked, we don't want this theoretical book. Tell me, what are your problems? What should we write about? What should we tackle? So it should be a practical book when you want to do a participation. And we did. And the conclusion of this 30 plus people came into like, let's discuss people first, because if you want to bring, let's say, light on people, and nowadays, also through social media, there is always public discussion, but who the hell is public, you know? So we answered that in terms of categories in the first chapter. The second is about space, right? Because if you don't understand context of space, as I said, you will be possibly wrong. And only then comes this processual part. For those who live in Prague, you may be familiar with work of Institute of Planning. They only have this part, processes, right? But we include this and this, which makes it already more concise. Okay, I'm going to show you first few charts, maybe from this humans of Bratislava, and we use the term humans because I just don't like the term like voters of Bratislava. Or sometimes politicians speak about people who don't live in Bratislava, they use it like CP, you know, CESPOLNY, like across the cross-country people, and they really treat them as second-class opinions. So basically here we covered all the groups of people who might be in the city and may not be these normative voters, you know, like the public. And when we look at people, I don't look at individuals, not at all. I always look through categories of age, gender, income, ethnicity, because if you combine all of that, you will have very different lifestyle and a very different group. I just want to show you like this like part of our work, because the important part in participation is ask like who is silent, you know, and who is certainly not. So sometimes you have to shut down people who are already very, you know, outspoken, like for example on social media, and then look for people who are silent. So this is our picture of the process of Miletičova trhovisko, big market in Bratislava, and there is like Vietnamese community, and we say, oh, we want to be very inclusive, let's do survey in Vietnamese language. So we spend a lot of time and money to translate this into Vietnamese language, and then only 2 people answer, you know, and we were like, oh my god. So then we had to hire a Slovak Vietnamese who was going like this, like discussing face to face, so we could get the information that we wanted. And it was super exhausting, but we had to do it because those 2,000 people who answered, you know, like survey online and were Slovaks and mostly young or digitally savvy people had to be, you know, like equalized with other people. So that's why we never use only one one way of one tool of people, like how to ask people. Okay, this is the map of aging population in Bratislava. We create those maps, out of data. Because now you can see Bratislava is already aging. So the blue parts are really old part, like more than 43% here in Central, or those first sídliska, mass housing already are dying out. The first life cycle is over and we will be aging. What does it mean for participatory processes? That you have so many old people in there. If you design these participatory processes, it means very practical things. Like, for example, don't organize events in the evening, because elderly people are very early. They are like morning people and during the day people. In the evening, they tend to go usually back home. Also, if you design a meeting, please find this meeting in very good proximity by walking or public transport. Elderly people usually don't drive cars. So this is really important for physical accessibility. And as we learn in pandemics, not everybody is online, definitely. So sometimes when we did those online, we had to create like offline alternatives. And we were calling people like on the phone, and they were talking to us like elderly people. And sometimes not only about things that they think about, I don't know, street, but also how they were, because they were pretty much isolated. So it was a little bit like a therapy, and I found it really beautiful. And also during pandemics, we actually created a lot of print materials like into mailboxes, because we just couldn't rely on internet. I think internet is pretty divisive place, Okay, second map, commuters. These are top 14 places where people from outside of Bratislava come and commute into Bratislava. And this second map is actually like SIM cards location. Okay, they come into central parts, into shopping malls on the outskirts. This is Volkswagen factory, So why I'm discussing these people? Because even daily commuters are users of the city, and I need to know their opinions or like on things. But these people are very efficient when it comes to city. It, like come there, you do your part, you get out of the city. So it's not like you would be called for city hall meeting in the evening, right? You have to know the mobility patterns. So if I know that they are coming via train station or bus station, or I know that they tend to go to shopping mall or like some administration office complexes, I go there, with my, I don't know, like surveys, like workshops. And if I know that they will be in a hurry because they will be doing that, I design the activities with maximum efficiency. For example, take a leaflet or put a board where you can actually use no language, maybe just smiles or hearts or something for very quick feedback, right? And then also you can use online methods because these people tend to be commuters. Many of them are digitally savvy, so you could do it as well. So there are ways how to target these people. Foreigners, of course. We have 40,000 people in city of Bratislava, which is 8% of population. Mostly we have people from Ukraine and Serbia. Then we are not very interesting place for Central European or Visegrad region. But also, when we design participation for foreigners, one thing to address is the accessibility, and it means different things, right? First thing, obvious thing, is the language, because these people will not understand maybe your language. But also you have to go deeper, because these people, maybe they're coming from different backgrounds. They may not feel the responsibility like to participate, or maybe they will be afraid. The second part of the story of Vietnamese vendors, we asked them, of course, through gatekeeper, but they were very, very, distrustful towards us. It was the first time that the city asked them something, and they basically felt that we are going to get some information that they will put them in a risk or something. So it's not so easy. You have to have trusted gatekeeper, which means I, as a white woman, cannot go just into Vietnamese community. Okay, but then you have to think about, like, foreigners are not one homogeneous group. So if you design this, you have to really ask those questions. What is educational background, working status? Do they live alone? Do they gather in community or clusters? Do they have their own organization? Can we contact them through this organization? And actually, what is the district they live? what is the culture. We found out from our foreigners, we have like basically male foreigners, men working here, and there are two types of foreigners. One, if I put it very bluntly, is a Serbian worker working in a factory, Volkswagen, and he's low paid. And then we have this male, like ambassador manager in the center of the city, earning a lot of money and speaking beautiful English. So the other layer, how we can look at public, is economic income. We took the data from social insurance for 14 years, and basically what you can see, the more blue, the more, let's say, economically prosperous district. So this is obviously Old Town, the southern part around Danube, you know, where people build their houses, are growing. And these are eastern part near Raffinery, old Raffinery, like that was the last residential place. And these are those villages alike districts. These are Carpathian, let's say, hills around here, and it basically old inhabitants. So of course their income is lower. And when you look at this, then you can also think about, okay, people with different economic conditions have totally different motivations and different lifestyles. People with less money obviously will live in worse places, cheaper places, and the worst quality part of Bratislava is the eastern part. So no wonder this map is showing this. When we design participation process, we have to really ask: is the city for all, or we are only asking those who can afford it, like central locations? And of course, people who have to earn their living, like basic living, will possibly not feel invited or responsible for like public participation or something else, because it's just not on their mindset. So we really have to use gatekeepers, again, people that they trust, and different language. I will just tell you that here, this part of the city, the most petitions I have from this part. These people are constantly, you know, like, let's say, not so happy, not so educated. It feels like there's some kind of bubbling, you know, like a problem coming out of that. To make this book even more usable, not only looking at the maps and categories, we also took, and this I copied entirely from Viennese gender mainstreaming practice, like spatial needs of different people, like, you know, kids below 6 years, young teenagers, and you have everything written, like how do they move, what do they do? So there are like texts. This is a manual actually for these groups of people. They have different needs, men and women in productive age. This is okay. This is very like male, female, but it also can be like a mobility pattern of a person who is taking care of someone. This is someone. This is Andrea going from work to, I don't know, kindergarten, catching a child, and everything, you know. And while I don't have child, I'm going from work to maybe do some hobby and going back home. So my mobility pattern is like this, and this is much more complex. And of course, that creates many problems and themes to solve it. Okay, then of course, there you have chapters for elderly people who are not homogeneous groups. We brought in also chapters about the needs of people near poverty line, homeless people, people with disabilities, or even drug users. They will totally kill me in Bratislava for such progressive manual, of course, foreigners. Now I'm coming to second part of the book. This will be for people who are interested maybe in mapping of the city. It's really important to understand area and specific context of that. Just like I showed you, in the eastern part, we have more petitions, little income, worse quality of environment. It all tells something about the story, and you have to really design that. And if you do mapping, it's very interdisciplinary, like social scientists being translated into applied research, which architects or policymakers have to do. It's really exciting. So it's a practice. So this is, for example, Miletičová trhovisko, like the one I'm still talking about. This is, and we, before we do this participatory process, we gather many maps about transportation, lighting. Here we were even studying all the music videos that some artists did about this to get this cultural understanding of the space. So then we could actually start to design questions. It's really beautiful time when we do this. Of course, shop inventories can tell you a lot about the streets. Like if you have only certain prevalence of certain shops, like for example, gastro or high-end luxury brands, that's different as this part, which is Križna Street, and you have very beautiful mixture of everyday life. So I say this is still a healthy residential street compared to some others. So this will tell you a lot about story city. And of course, we do also park inventories when we compare where the cars come from, if they are registered. That's also part of our work. And this is also beautiful mapping people. We use coding systems and we put them into GIS, and then we map like if they walk alone, what activities that they do, what's possibly their age, gender. Like there is methodology on that, and then we create analysis of public spaces. So for example, this is on the riverfront of Danube, and there's this beautiful place. And there was a question if this zone, which is under construction, many high-rises coming in, if it's actually a good public space, like equally, then we said, okay, let's follow sociability. If people walk together, or if you bring a date, you want to bring them to the most beautiful place. And of course, this is the concentration of dates, romantic dates, which we could actually observe by the river, which of course is different than in here, which is parking lot, etc. So you can nuance a lot. And of course, I brought it in here because Andrea is all about visuals, and I said, okay, it's pandemic. Let's look at the digital patterns of what people leave on Instagram, because for me, Instagram is like a platform on beauty and superficiality and actually happiness, which we don't usually get in public participation. So we said, what do people, for example, post about our parks? So we use actually artificial intelligence, downloaded the posts, use this to see what were the top 3 motives people posted about Sadianka, which is Central Park in Bratislava. Then we analyze hashtags like and compare them with other 4 parks, and you could see people were talking for also about architecture and built environment compared to nature. So it's then we were doing conclusions, and of course this geotagging tells you what are the places which are being most photographed or most popular, which is also interesting. And then we found out many nuances. And then in the end, you will find the biggest chapter. Like finally, if you know people and participation, then in place you can design participatory scenarios. I see I didn't translate the title, but we have designed like scenarios from very beginning of emergence of project till the end for very pragmatic documents, master plan, community plan, public space reconstruction, new brownfields, or like places. I will just show you because those scenarios are like combining things that you have to do as project manager. It's like subway system, phase 1, phase 2. Then you have notes for communication, and in those like brackets you can see the best participatory method. It can be survey, it can be workshop, it can be festival, etc. But it's all very, very logical. So for example, now we have like such scenarios. If you want to do something in the city, okay, from the beginning somebody decides to do it till the end, realization, all kinds of documentation, and you can see it with notes for legal, participation, communication, project management. So we create a big structure in that. And then of course I will just show you maybe some those things in the brackets, like participatory method, right? Once you have this done, you can use some, and I only you find notes in this manual, like for example walk or bike ride. I think they are one of the most inclusive methods that you can use if you design them properly. So we like to walk with people through places because they are less aggressive, much more constructive, and the walk itself changes mood and thinking. And we like to do walks in repetition on the same street. For example, last time we used people with handicap to be our guide. That really changed the whole environment, and people became more perceptive over, like small things. Or we designed one night walk for women, and this is a female policy woman who was saying something about the street. There is no problem regarding crime, but once she shut down and women start to talk about points of anxiety, which was much more qualitative and not already a crime report, we found out so much more. So we change the time when we do our work. Of course, then the Metropolitan Forum, something for strategy people, and when we invite other people. Public hearings went online, of course, and it's somehow leveled up inclusivity in terms like never before. There were video traces of high quality media content for urban planning. So now people tend to watch it, and we have thousands of visitors or like viewers on something so complicated as master plan. And my colleagues who never spoke into media before, these urban planners, now love it and don't want to go back into this very conflicting, town hall meetings. Or there is different method like neighbor meeting with over a map, when you invite people from like residents and people to this, like use the map, talk about it. It has also different benefits. I mean, there are plenty of methods, but you have to really know like what you want to achieve, with who is your target audience, and then ask yourself, what is the proper method for everyone? Just to sum it up, because this was very quick introduction to participatory design. Like if I'm talking about inclusion or inclusivity, really knowing whom to focus on knowledge and the needs of specific groups, because there is not one universal public, And if you want theoretical background, I think the intersectional feminism is the excellent concept for this, because you really go through those categories: age, gender, economic, income, ethnicity, and that will define main categories of people and lifestyle, right? And if you then think beyond these categories in context of time and place, you will be just very knowledgeable about the place, and you can actually do a lot as a public servant or as an expert. Okay, so this would be it. Thank you. I hope you actually saw it. Not only my first image, and I'm sure I'm out of time. So, Andrea, let's go back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milota. Actually, you were perfectly on time. You delivered in 25 minutes, so thank you so much for that. But mostly I'm interested in the content that you delivered. And I think it's great the way how all three presentations today really united in the importance and empowerment of the bottom-up perspective. Of talking about individuals, talking about the peripheries, giving us these different perspectives that are not mainstream, and also showing us that what we are dealing with, if we are talking about the social and political visibility, then we are always talking about long-term processes, about something which is always participatory, something which always have to be carefully researched, and which takes time. When we think about it, when we try to design our approach to the topic, to the people. So I think that this idea of visibility as a long-term social process, which is still ongoing and in a way never ending, and the way how we, from different practical perspectives and from different positions, want to step into, always have to be done carefully and individually designed for different communities. So that's what I very much liked, and in a way it's kind of a summary for me, at least, of tonight's program. And what is my question actually is, when you said that, when you mentioned the first reactions of people when you actually came to them and you started to ask about how they feel in the city, what is their experience with the streets, where they do live, etc. So this kind of hesitancy, or even the suspicious moments that you are using their detail or their experience or their knowledge, that actually there are some negative expectations.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you what is your explanation for that? Me personally, I'm thinking about kind of post-totalitarian experience, that would play a role. So could you elaborate a little bit on that and how you are actually also trying to get this kind of, to get over this first barrier that immediately can emerge?
Yeah, basically asking the question of trust, because this is like big thing, and we know like trust cannot be built over one Facebook post or just meeting me. You know, I have to earn your trust, you have to earn my trust. So that's why I mean, when the office was established and everybody said, oh, now let's do the participation, and you know, the project was already designed, there was bulldozer coming on the street, on the place, like already doing things. I'm not doing this is not participation. I mean, you're just like PR promoter. You have communication department for that. You want to do participation, you have to give me at least 1 year ahead before you start to do your project. Allow me to ask you all those questions. Do you have resources? Do you really have integrity? Can you reassure that you can process some of those comments, and who is making decision, whom you want to ask, and what is the topic that people should be debating and what not? And once we are through this, I think over a year, my colleagues actually learn that what I want from them is actually quite complex. So they take it now with respect, and every process that we do properly doesn't have much problems, right? Like not like we are like distrustful or not transparent. We do it with full, let's say, transparency, but we have to be very transparent about what can people comment on and what not. So my let's say standpoint is like, you don't have to trust me, but you know, like, this is what we are doing. You can find it on the website. I'm asking you this. It's apparent we cannot change this, but let's talk about that. And I think because to build something takes between 2 or 8 years, you know, like to get all this documentation and realization. So people are still, because this is first term of Matúš Balogh, the new mayor, like to see the first results of the work. We already have some first results of the much more complex project. Once, I don't know, parking garages are done by the city, once the first social housing is done by the city, people will get calmer, you know. It's done. This is the proof, you know, they can do it. So it will be much better. Until now, I would say honesty is the best weapon, and we try to be quite tolerant when people come and shout at you, because they basically are venting different problems, not about the, you know, like, things that you're discussing.
Thank you for the answer. And my second question would be very specifically when we are talking about this trust building process, where you are finding this gatekeepers and these community caretakers, because they are here as in kind of entering, you know, they are entering points or elements which allow you to enter the community. So then usually I do not suppose that everyone is a member of your office or of your team. So actually you have to carefully build a huge social network of collaborators. And you work with completely different communities, as was obvious from your presentation. So where do you find these people?
That's why we did this book together, you know, so many people, because everybody already had a network. So I wanted to take their network. So when I'm looking for foreigners, there are NGOs which are working with foreign people. They will provide me those gatekeepers. Or I have the luxury of having 1 anthropologist and 2 sociologists in my team internally. So when we're doing, for example, a train station, I send them into the place, and I say, find me those specific groups and observe the place and tell me who might be important and who maybe not. So we always, you know, like ask for the list, and then we go and observe, because maybe there's somebody else. Sometimes it can be shop assistant who is very vocal. You can find this out. So again, I say social science have a big role or big potential to be working for something so technical as architecture. We just have to, you know, find those applied methods. So that's my answer.
Thank you so much. I think it's really empowering for all of us who are working in the field of social sciences to hear that, because I believe all of us, we highly believe in that. And here is a great example of how interdisciplinarity doesn't have to be only perceived as a trend, but it actually works and it can cause a change. So I thank you so much for your work and for the inspirational talk. And at this moment, I would also like to thank to our audience for being with us, for watching us. I would also like to thank to Fresh Eye team, everyone who is contributing to our activities. And mostly I would like to thank to Hraničář Gallery, who inspired us, who asked us for collaboration, who brought the topic of the light to our program. And I cannot imagine the better topic to start the new year with. The topic of the light. I hope that it will bring you a lot of light, and it will also make visible some important new topics, new inspirations, new motifs in your life. So hopefully more light for all of us in 2022, and hopefully next time we will meet in Prague in person. Stay in touch, stay with us through our website, Facebook, and we will be happy to bring you another interesting program. Have a nice evening. Thank you all.